Dr. Sam Newton, Time Team's Anglo-Saxon expert extraordinaire, harp player and reciter of Anglo-Saxon verse. I only do these, Sam, so I can listen to you talk Anglo-Saxon, which I really enjoy.
Just as well. I've got some lined up for you too.
Yeah.
On this occasion.
Eastry. Yes. I've said to you before, I think this is your fault, really. We ended up chasing after all these Anglo-Saxon sites, and Anglo-Saxon sites are hard work. It was nearly aceramic. In other words, they didn't have lots of stuff. Most of the buildings were made of wood. Most of the objects they owned were made of leather, wood, or other perishable house your fathers. And so we end up finding Anglo-Saxon sites often as burials. But Eastry began with, I think, a rather interesting legend connected with, I've got his name, a Kentish king, Egbert.
Yes.
Who clearly didn't really believe in, let's keep it all in the family and care for each other. What did Egbert get up to? And why was Eastry a particular focus of his activity?
Well, you start with the most wonderful place name, Eastry, the Eastern region. Sounds like the old WA Eastern region. The Eastern, it's clearly the east half, what becomes the Kingdom of Eastern Kent, with its own Archbishop in Canterbury, of course, and later all part of the Canterbury St Augustine's grouping of hundreds. And it's a very ancient kind of a name, and it's the heart of Eastry Hundred. It's the place of authority. So just on the place name and the landscape setting, you can infer the very strong likelihood of a major Anglo-Saxon royal hall, not just as a royal residence, but a kind of feasting centre, meeting place, all rolled into one. And Mick put his finger on that at a very early date in the program, the morning of day one, didn't he? Because we had this wonderful hill just to the north of the present village of Eastry, and where lots of lovely finds. And even while it was brilliant, you actually had metal detectorists turning up stuff during the course of the 3-day shoot. It was absolutely perfect. That's looking at it from the north, and you can see you're at work there up on the hill.
Yeah.
You zoom in on that. That is one of the finds that had come up.
Oh.
And straight away, if you've seen any of the Sutton Hoo treasure, one of the great sort of trademarks of the workshop is that beautiful combination of garnet gems set in gold in combination with blue glass. Oh. And this, of course, a feature of some of the Kentish jewellery as well. And that is very, very high status indeed. That's royal level.
And I seem to remember, Sam, when we last discussed this is garnet that's coming from somewhere like Burma. It's not exactly locally available.
No, exactly. It's coming from the Indian subcontinent, the Jalalabad area. They turn up. Sri Lanka is another one. It's just amazing, and it shows the much broader scope of the background culture that's going on here. Anglo-Saxon is not just happening in isolation. It's part of that broader frame of reference, and more immediately a kind of continental Germanic heroic age, which is what so much of the poetry is all about. And
Sam, when we referred to Egbert and the death of, he had his two cousins.
Little princes.
Why did he have them murdered? And in which document are we told about that murder?
We are told about the document about the story is in a wonderful series of manuscripts known as the Kentish Royal Saints Legends. And Canterbury, with its big scriptorium, is anxious to preserves this what is local Kent material in wonderful detail. Yeah, so that's another thing that really puts Eastry on the map, because it's a reference to a royal hall in which a murder takes place, in which the two little princes are buried. It's a bit like the Princes in the Tower. There's a strong kind of storytelling aspect to that. But historically, we can recognise these people. We can see the context. King Egbert was there. Actually, I've got a genealogy I can show you. The whole of the royal line of the Kentish kings
Where's your cursor?
There's Athelbert.
Oh, yeah.
And his wife Beata,
Yeah.
and his son Yadbold, who upsets the church by marrying his stepmother.
Oh.
There's St Athelbert of Lineage, who married Edwin of Northumbria, Bede tells, and she's the one associated with wonderful work at Lineage, recently excavating a royal hall site there, under the cricket field, I think it was. And
this is one of your dynasty lines that you do so beautifully.
For a PowerPoint presentation on the background here.
And where's our guy? Where's Egbert?
Here they are, down here. The next generation, Yadbold, his son Jormunrad, and all his children, all of the ladies canonized, which is an interesting story in itself. Oh. And they're the two little princes, Athelrad and Athelbert, and they are murdered. And that's their cousin Egbert, who fosters them, but he has a wicked counsellor, as they do, who says it's called Thunor. We summarise the story rather briefly in the programme, but it's clearly dynastic politics. These boys are seen as a threat, which is how they end up being murdered. But Egbert is sort of semi-detached from, so he doesn't directly get the blame for the murder. Thunor gets the blame, and he comes to a suitable bad end. Yeah. And Egbert has to make great compensation by paying the surviving members of the family, his sisters, an enormous weregild, a compensation payment for their deaths, which is all part of the foundation of the great minster on the Thanet, which became a great spiritual power station as a result. So,
and what was that called, Sam, the minster on the Thanet?
It's simply called Minster. Very close to Eastry, as you can see there.
Of course. And we arrived on this site with this legend.
Yeah, the legend is very well preserved. We have Latin and English, Old English versions of it. It's a fine piece of Old English prose, and it's a bit like the sagas. It starts off with kind of who was descended from whom and so on. And then we get this great legend of the foundation of Thanet, which involves the murder of these two princes at Eastry. And this is what made it, we had a murder mystery, effectively. And so we know there's a hall there, and the boys were buried there in secret to start with. But then, because it's a miracle in a saint's life, the miraculous light shines out, and the murder is revealed. I say Thunor comes to a suitable bad end. And,
what happened to him?
Well, in the process of the paying of compensation, it's a lovely story. And again, it's more folktale than history, but it involves the sister being given this great estate, and she chooses the estate by allowing the size of it. She has a pet hind who runs ahead of them as they ride round this landscape in Thanet. And this pet hind, of course, because she's a saint and it's all divinely ordained, the hind very cleverly marks out this huge boundary estate of the estate, which is what the king is bound. In a way, it's a kind of folktale of how a wise woman tricks a king into giving him a greater gift that he intends to. And Thunor gets worried about this and realises they've been duped. But at a suitable moment in the story, near a famous barrow, actually called Thunor's Barrow in the story, the earth opens up and he's swallowed up and disappears suitably. Yeah. It's a saint's life.
Serves him right.
Yeah, exactly.
So their time team turn up, not on the Isle of Thanet as it happens, but at Eastry.
Yeah.
Looking for the palace, metal detectors working on the finds. What did it strike you that was a focus for the program, and why would you advise someone to watch it? What tickled your fancy about the program?
Well, you had a charming, you had the farmer on the hill, and a charming man who had the big house, Eastry Court there, and invited you in, and all the right credentials were there, weren't they? And I remember coming in, we went into his house, and it looked like an 18th century outside, but inside they had these amazing timber beams that were 12th century, almost certainly going back to an earlier site, plumb site, right next to the church. And as Stuart so ably pointed out, you could clearly see a defined enclosure typical of an early royal manor. And the adjacency of hall and church, it's all there in the landscape history. And so although as it turned out, we couldn't actually find any distinctive post holes, largely because the main structure would probably be underneath the house. And as Mick said to the owner, whose name was it John somebody, he said, "Well, I'm afraid we'll have to demolish your house in order to find much more of it." And the owner said, "I'll get back to you on that, Mick," which I thought was a good move.
And we had some nice finds. There was a glass goblet of some description, and a brooch, and one or two other things that turned up.
Yes.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, the degree to which we've got the texts. You can refer to all these historical events. You then go into these Anglo-Saxon sites, and it requires some determination to extract some of the reality out of them.
It does. I think you were, as often is the case, there's a problem of locating Anglo-Saxon structures because of the often very ephemeral archaeological legacy. But especially in a built-up, clearly much used, much frequented, on a Roman road, right next to a church, if there had been any post holes that we been able to dig in this cellar, maybe not, but probably more likely not, because the earlier structure would have been obscured by all the later buildings. They would carry on rebuilding on the same plumb site that had led it to be used in the first place.
And
but
your
the nearby hill, sorry,
go on.
I think the nearby hill, I thought it was very clever the way that Mick and Stuart between them gave us a sense that Eastry, and this happens a lot, that it's just the name of a little parish, but it once referred to the whole region, the whole immediate area. In fact, we've got Eastry 100 on the old maps, and centred on that hill, and that hill in particular, which seemed to have various changing names, as we were saying earlier, Anglo-Saxon, no sign of serious Anglo-Saxon buildings. And what's more, despite all those metalwork finds, like that beautiful brooch, which you would normally expect to be finding in a burial, no signs of burials at all. And Mick's solution that it was probably therefore a place where much frequented because it was a moot hill, a meeting place for the whole 100. And that's, again, very characteristic. The whole 100 is named after the meeting place. And what's more, he then added the point, in fact, he sent me off on a little, I must show you this picture. Just to the north is a little village now called Woodnersborough, a most wonderful place name. And that, I was on my old BMW motorbike in those days, so it was ideal for wrecking the landscape. Could see more than Stuart could on his push bike. So that's just north of that wonderful hill, just north of the village of Eastry. And it's a wonderful place name that still got the correct vowel length if you're an old English language pedant like me. It's Woodnersborough. From the old English, you can see down here, Beor, the barrow. Woodners, that's the genitive form, the barrow of Woden, and the long O is replicated with the longer O, the double O in the actual place name. So not only is it a perfect old English place name, it's spelt correctly as well. And what his suggestion was, and this was a thing that emerged when I went to have a look, where is Woden's barrow that should be there? When we actually went there, there's Woodnersborough Church, and there it is when I was there that time in May 2005. At the church, you can see it's the same church, but in the background here, they've got this massive, looks like a mountain, and they call it the Mount. But there, there's a few trees in the way, but they're looking through the hedges and between the leaves. There's nothing like that there now. And what Mick so wisely pointed out was that clearly there is an element of artistic license there. And in fact, the line of that, just beyond the line of that, is the view of the hill on which we were working just north of the village of Eastry. So almost certainly, therefore, the Woden's Barrow, as he pointed out in the programme, is this very hill, which is completely consistent with the mention he'd already made of it being a meeting place. They'd be meeting at a sacred place in the landscape. Of course they would. And there's a nice view up there too.
Sam, have you got any wee bit of the Anglo-Saxon you can let us have related to this site?
Yeah, but a remarkable coincidence. Can you see, that's the opening of my translation with an interlinear literal translation.
Wonderful.
The edition. And that starts out, as I said before, with it's a bit like those pedigrees they list in the Old Testament, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. And so this takes us on down. So there's Jormunrad, the grandson of Athelbert I mentioned earlier, and his various children, including the one that married into the Mercian royal family, and all these lovely children, Mildbur, Mildthryth, Mildyth, and a lowly brother called Merivin. We don't know anything about him except he's called the Holy Child, probably by all those saintly sisters it must have rubbed off by osmosis or something.
And is this the piece that's got the story of...
Yeah, it is. And then you carry on through that in reference to Much Wenlock and all sorts of interesting... Yeah, here we are. And then it tells us, Thon waron Athelred and Athelbrucht, the Halgan Adlingas, befaster Edgebecht, Gunga, to Fostra and to Lara. For then he waron at hera Uldran befallena, and was he sakuning hera fadran sonu Jokenbritters and Saxburg, his quena. And so you've still got the genealogical aspect of it there. So effectively Athelrad and Athelbert are Egbert's cousins. Their father had died, and referring to his pedigree, Egbert, the son of Jorkenbert, and that's Queen Saxburg, really a formidable woman. She is the great niece of King Radwold from Sutton Hoo, East Anglian princess.
So the story goes on that his Thunor comes up.
That's it. Well, you've had them introduced, and it tells us how sagacious and wise they were. But the wicked counsellor Thunor, typically a pre-Christian name, Ofthucht. It was thought of. Literally, that's a lovely compound verb there.
Follow it with your doodad again.
Ofthucht, the Anum, das Königes Jeferan, se was Thunor hatten. He thought this was a bit off, and was worried about his own position, and so scrolling on. He accused them secretly to the king, and he quoth, if he liban mostan that he agtha yehini ye his bana das kuneriches benamda. If they lived, they would either deprive either him or his own children, his own bands, of the kingdom. And so then they planned the secret killing of the princes, Adelingers, Duranunga Aquelan, and but the king would not give him leave because they were kindred to him. They were where's that word? Yasib. They were sib to him. But Thunor, the Aethelings are his cousins, so he can't be seen to be participating in the murder of kindred. That's against all.
That terrible final line. Then soon so did as he before was yearning. How do you say that?
And he da sooner swaradud swahi yearnende was.
Oh.
So it's the wicked counsellor who goes ahead unilaterally, and it all happens at night, of course.
And the two kids were buried in a hall at Eastry, probably that was on that mound or near the mound that we were working on.
Well, now that takes us back to the archaeological question. I know Tony got a bit overexcited about no evidence for... he kept going about a palace, and I had to tell him off about that later on, because the word, as you can see there, and it is Eastry, but it's not in this text because it's in the Latin text. We know it's at Eastry. It's a hear cellar, a high hall. Certainly a high hall would be appropriate on that great hill, it's a Hillborough. But it was probably, as Stuart was saying, and Mick agreed, nearer the church, probably under the Eastry Court, as we suggested. I mean, it could be on the high hall, but on the high hill, but how do you explain? I mean, the top of the hill was looked at pretty thoroughly, unless you could argue that any foundations may have been removed by that windmill, for example. That was an impressive bit of geophysics. As Phil pointed out to John, actually finding something with geophysics for a change.
Yes. I always like those moments when we have a vision of an ancient Anglo-Saxon hall and we turn up a windmill.
Yeah.
And I tried to look marginally enthusiastic just to encourage John a bit, and Phil promptly dumps on him that
Yes,
it's clearly impressive, but it's only a windmill.
that's right. They even had a bet on it, didn't they? Or was that the other one? But anyway,
Sam, thank you very much. Lovely to hear your Anglo-Saxon again.
always
And
a pleasure.
You're doing your chats and lectures at the moment on.
I am, yes.
site.
The seminars, www.wuffings.co.uk, or the big study days, and that's going really well. We've got Michelle Brown coming on the Lindisfarne Gospels. We've got Michael Wood coming on the ongoing question. We talked about this, the Battle of Brunanburh. Now that's a great theme, lost battle sites. And all on the Wuffings website, and all booked these days, at least the study days, via Eventbrite, which is worth persevering with.
Well done, Sam.
Keep up the good work. Bye for now.
Bye.
Goodbye.
We can't do any of this work without you, so please subscribe, back us on Patreon, and make sure that Time Team comes back again.